Diablo IV, the Talisman of the Tormented Ruins. In the shadowed realm of Sanctuary, where darkness and demons plague the lands, two unlikely companions embarked on a perilous journey. For they had both grown tired of the relentless evil that shrouded their world, and through a chance encounter, their paths had crossed, and their woes had been shared. They had taken shelter in a nearby tavern from a violent and raging storm, and it was a tavern they were both immediately evicted from. Cast back into the pouring rain under the shadow of a cloud much greater than the eye could see. Nomad, a shunned necromancer, an outcast since birth, all for his quest of knowledge in the darker arts, and his abilities to communicate and control the dead. And Nanok, the barbarian, a hulking force of raw strength and determination, but the constant foul smell of dried demon blood and less than pleasing appearance had rendered him nothing more than a shadow among the townsfolk. Their quest had begun in the ancient city of Westmarch. Together, they had left their lives behind, taken what little they needed, and traveled east. They searched for nothing in particular. They had no path nor direction. They were merely lost souls seeking redemption for apparent sins they had not understood. Nature kept them satiated. Food and water could be gathered along the way. All they needed were their weapons and their wits. The barbarian growled slightly as he cast his eyes down towards the necromancer.
That skull you have around your belt, what is it for?
Nomad moved his scythe aside to uncover the chained skull tethered to his belt.
Undead power. Yes. I need a channel. An energy source, if you will. A focal point. It is through the skull that I can raise the dead.
No wonder you were shunned. Carrying that thing around with you.
And you? Your amulet. I notice it's the only thing you tinker with now and then.
Nanok briefly toyed with a golden amulet round his neck. It appeared to show a coiled snake with two heads, and somehow a feathered undercarriage.
It is a legendary item, passed down by my ancestors. It marks the disobedience we have for the forces that try to strike us down. Offers me resistance to all elements.
I see. Resistance we may well need.
For days they traveled under the heat of the sun, and within the cold moonlit nights they pondered on their journey, their chosen path, their calling. But answers did not come easy to them. There were no signs, no spirits guiding the way. And it was only when they reached the humble town of Tristram that they finally found a true purpose. The town had clearly seen better days. Its wooden huts half desolate, half eroded, the blackened wood appeared to be in heavy decay. The wind did little to calm their nerves as they strode through, a slight breeze playing with the wooden shutters of the nearby huts. A sense of foreboding came over them, as if a crawling ghostly finger ran down their spines. For the eyes of the many crows that littered this land were not the only eyes upon them. Suddenly, a priest emerged from a shelter, his once colorful robe now sullen and dirtied, as he stepped onto the wet mud-covered path.
Please, come, follow me!
Nanok and Nomad stopped in their tracks and briefly eyed each other. The man seemed harmless enough. And after all, was this not what they had wanted? A cry for help, a person in need, a calling.
Please, come.
The priest repeated as he waddled off to the nearby church, and the wanderers followed. The structure resembled the rest of the town in its state of decay. Old foundations held together by rotting supports. Leftover water from a recent rainstorm still dropped through the holes in the roofing. The furniture inside left abandoned, toppled over, stained.
The sanctity of this place has been fouled.
The priest turned.
Do you know of what happened here?
I have some knowledge, yes.
Those days were long ago, but now, with Lilith, I fear they will return to us all. Sanctuary itself will fall. But there may be a way to change our fate, to turn the tides of evil.
Nanook eyed his surroundings, always wary of deception, always expecting the worst, for there was something not quite right about this priest. A little too enthusiastic, maybe. Or was it that his clothes were a little too tattered? Or possibly it was just all of his pessimistic mind? Nomad stepped forward, his feelings the exact opposite. He was enticed, enthralled. His eyes filled with questions as the priest continued.
I have heard rumors whispered of a relic capable of tipping the scales in the eternal struggle against the forces of evil. A talisman of such power that it can dispel any creature born of evil, allowing one to walk directly toward their presence and end their pitiful life. If we could do this with such ease, well, we may just be able to conquer the devil.
Nanook scoffed.
Sounds dubious to me. Where did you hear of this fable?
Oh, I listened to many a story from many a traveler. Indeed, it may be a fable, but is it not one worthy of our intrigue?
Where, Father? Where would we find such an object?
Oh, far from here. You must travel to the desolate highlands of the Fractured Peaks. There, you will find the Tormented runes. The talisman is hidden deep within.
And protected by what army?
Oh, well, I'm afraid your guess is as good as mine. But have no illusion. Protected it shall be.
Then we shall go.
Oh, I pray the Lord be with you. You would do well to walk the path least traveled, for there will be dangers enough where you are going. Best to eliminate the risk of ambushes along the way. Please, stay the night here. We shall feast, and you may prepare yourselves for the journey ahead.
And so, with blades sharpened and bellies satiated, Nanook and Nomad set forth from the town of Tristram into the wilderness, leaving the relative safety of civilization behind them. For now they were bound by a shared purpose, to retrieve the lost talisman. Following the priest's advice, they followed a lonely path, devoid of life and clear of the undead. They traveled over the Kanduras Mountains and across the Aranok Desert to the Twin Seas, charted, boarded, and bound towards Kyrgyzstan. Eventually, they arrived at the desert city of Gayakul, another populace that would undoubtedly hold them at arm's width, fearful of their kind, cowering away from them. But strangely, the people here were not so wary of warriors. They seemed to welcome them to their land, thankful for their presence, grateful that warriors walked among them. Did they honor their efforts in this holy war? Or were they merely welcoming the enemy of their enemies? An enemy that they were yet to face. Before them now, the path to the Fractured Peaks was fraught with danger, as twisted creatures and malevolent spirits lurked in every shadow. Yet the duo pressed on, their determination unyielding in the face of adversity. Ascending into the high rocky lands, through the devastation and violence that desolation reach, and the dangers of the Valley of the Strayed, they forged ahead, their bond growing stronger with each step taken in unison. And as night fell once more over the desert, and a crimson moon began its ascent to the heavens, the duo came to rest by the smoky ruins of an abandoned settlement. The pale rock walls barely holding on, slowly crumbling away. The wooden roofing would not provide much cover. What little panels remained were sparse and far apart. Nomad made himself comfortable, while Nanook gathered the parched wooden frames from a nearby ruin and made a fire to warm their souls.
What is this place? Do you know it?
We're in the foothills of Saran, just south of the caldera. As for these ruins, who knows? Some poor village. Their families probably burned to death where they eat. These lands are all doomed.
You've traveled a lot, haven't you?
Enough to see that these lands are beyond repair. It doesn't matter where you go. The desert, the marshlands, the hills, the coast. If the demons don't get you, the humans will.
Yes. Sometimes I wonder if we are worth saving.
There is evil that lurks in all of us. We do not need the devils to help destroy this realm.
You are full of joy tonight, barbarian.
You have seen it too, haven't you?
Yes.
Bitter resentment, jealousy, envy, from one outcast to another. We share the same beliefs, even on the good days.
Yes, indeed.
Nanook finished stacking the wood pile and lit the fire. The warmth hit them instantly as the glow lit the surrounding area in a dull orange hue.
A half moon tonight.
Yes. It won't last for long, though. The clouds are rolling in from the north. It will be cold tonight.
Come, sit beside me, Nanook. You've done enough.
Yes. There is plenty of wood around here if we need it. Tell me, this scythe that you have, a peculiar weapon of choice, is it not?
I guess so. It seems fitting for my abilities, though. And it cuts through flesh as good as any other. Its appearance is synonymous with death, is it not? And you? Don't you think you're a little too overloaded?
A long sword is all you need, but these hand axes come out when things get a little too messy, if you know what I mean.
Indeed I do. That is why I have the skull. We may need more help where we are going.
The fire continued to roar into the evening, as sure enough, the clouds rolled in and the night grew colder, darker. The distant sound of a wolf's howl carried on the wind, an ominous sound for the night ahead.
Do you think we are safe enough here? We have cover, but...
Nomad unhooked the skull from his belt. The eyes began to emit a faint green smoke.
Don't worry. I will summon a protective party for us.
And with that, the necromancer thrust forward his arm, the skull dangling beneath his hand, and with a surge of energy that flowed from his fingers, a body began to rise from the ground, followed by another, and then another. Their skeletal fingers clutching whatever weapons they had died with. Now they stood there, three deathly figures that seemed to act upon the necromancer's will.
Guard us,
ordered Nomad. The skeletal figures turned, spread out, and fortified their positions.
I'm not sure if I'm even more worried now than I was before.
Do not fear them. They will warn us if any evil comes our way.
If you say so. Okay, I sleep now.
As the new day dawned, the warriors collected themselves and pushed forward, leaving the desert behind them and crossing the sturdy bridge of the Forgotten Wastes. The free-flowing and somewhat rocky river down below seemed remarkably far away. They followed the linear path of the Frostbite Trail and finally crossed the chasm into the frozen lands and the bitter winds of the Icehowl Taiga. Snow fell upon them now as they followed the trail north to the desolate ruins of an old fortification. The remains of whatever battle happened here still strewn around and partially buried by the snow, for it had been centuries since this watchtower saw any mortal use. Chained cages swung eerily in the wind. An ominous orange glow spilled from the archway that led inside. As they reached the entrance of the Tormented ruins, a sense of foreboding washed over them. The air grew thick with a stench of decay, and the darkness seemed to swallow their very essence. But the barbarian and necromancer were undeterred, their minds set on the prize that awaited them within. Inside, a cool damp air came over them, the harrowing decay of both structure and bodies clear to see, for every corner of this blighted building contained the bones and skeletal remains of past warriors, or merely the poor folk that were dragged and coaxed into this building to be tortured and devoured by evil. Blood stained the stone flooring in every direction. Spatters climbed the walls, the wooden frames, and every inch of this forsaken place. A broken iron chandelier sung gently in the breeze above them as they passed a collection of stone statues, the faces worn by time. They continued through the desolate ruins until they reached a large open room with closed double doors on the far side. Nanok groaned.
There is nothing here. This is fool's errand.
No. They are here. I can feel their energy.
They?
The dead.
Suddenly, the double doors burst open with a violent bang that echoed throughout the chamber as an arrow flew past their heads. 3 skeletal soldiers approached them, shields held high, swords held higher. The necromancer quickly removed his weapon and launched himself forward with a surprising speed, his long scythe arcing through the air, cutting straight through the rotten wooden shield of the first skeletal warrior and reducing the undead minion to nothing more than a pile of bones on the ground. Now the barbarian, using an incredible show of strength, lifted his sword high and brought it down hard, splitting the archer in 2, before swiftly rolling forward, his spinning sword cutting the last skeleton's legs clean off at the knee. The skeleton fell to his stumps with a sickening clatter, as Nanok rose to his feet and promptly decapitated his opponent. The skull cracked and shattered as it hit the cold, hard floor.
That was easy.
They were just guards.
Guarding what?
The Talisman.
Well, should be a walk in park, eh?
The duo departed the room with haste, their morale lifted, their resolve now stronger than ever. Through yet another door they pushed forward, this one leading to a long and narrow passageway, the malignant stratum. The remains of a once royal red carpet leading their way under yet more steel chandeliers. Finally, they entered the Chamber of Calling. A large open room, the air stale and pungent, the foul scent of death lingering heavily in every corner. Strewn weapons and the remains of untold fallen were scattered around this apparent arena. Near the far wall stood a pedestal, upon which rested the coveted talisman, its apparent power radiating like a beacon in the dark. For the darkness in this dungeon hid the outer walls from sight, and from those shadows they appeared. Flesh threshers, their bloodied talons as sharp as their rotten teeth, their red-skinned backs covered in hardened armor, and their long spiked tails already coiled for attack. Amidst them, more skeletal warriors approached, and behind them all, the scourge of the land, a towering demon with enormous thick horns protruding from his ungodly skull. Spiked shards ruptured from his muscular torso and limbs as he walked toward them, a giant mace held tightly in his oversized hand.
Oh Lord, what in almighty is that?
It is just another demon, scum that needs slaying. Fresh meat. Welcome to your
With a roar that shook the very foundations of this unholy chamber, Nanok charged forward, his massive sword cleaving through the air with deadly precision. The towering devil parried his attack with ease, but the surprise was clear to see in his blood-colored eyes. Nanok swung again and again, the sound of steel upon steel echoing in the room. Nomad danced with the minions, dodging and sliding between the creature's strikes, his scythe cutting through the air with deadly accuracy. Bones fell, limbs flew, and blood was spilt in volumes. As the battle raged on, each blow fueled the fire of their determination as they took it in turns to battle both devil and minion. In a brief spell of calm, Nomad detached the skull from his belt and lifted it high. A ghostly green essence spread like a shockwave from its hollow eyes and seeped into the ground. Moments later, the dead began to rise, ready to obey, ready to fight. Now, the numbers had turned, and the fight was beginning to sway. Nanook and Nomad forced their way through the minions toward the Talisman, but the devil would not let them near. Each time he stood in their way, his mace arcing through the air with brutal force. As Nomad swung his scythe a final time, the last of the skeletal warriors fell to the ground as Nanook plunged his sword into the final flesh thresher, the beast roaring in agony as it died. But this cry infuriated the towering demon, and from his throat, a wave of hellfire projected across the chamber. The duo ducked and dived away, but the heat had already singed their skin. Another wave of flame pummeled toward them, this time enough for Nanook to drop his sword. The heat too much for his hands. Without wavering, Nanook grabbed his hand axes, and in a show of immense power, he spun like a whirlwind toward the beast. Nomad rose and followed his comrade into battle once more, his scythe aiming at the beast's legs. But these lesser warriors were no match for the scourge of the land, for they had neither the experience nor the skills needed to defeat such a beast. Their attacks were cast away with ease, as more minions began to spawn, seemingly from nowhere. And in that instant, Nomad's skeletal guardians were no more. Finally, with a mighty swing of his axe, Nanook struck a damaging blow, sending the devil crashing to the ground in a shower of dust and debris. He lifted his axe high and lunged toward the beast, but his jump was mistimed. His eyes widened as he realized his mistake, for the devil had raised his weapon, and as Nanook came down, he impaled himself on the sharp end of the demon's mace. The beast laughed as he rose to his feet, twisting the mace farther in before flinging the barbarian across the room like a used toy. Nomad raced forward.
No!
His scythe held high, but the demon parried the scythe with one hand while the other thrust itself through the necromancer's stomach. He lifted the squirming human high before flinging him too across the chamber. Now, as the echoes of battle faded into darkness, the demon approached the pedestal and gently lifted the talisman from its resting place. Nanook and Nomad, beaten, bloodied, and dying, could only watch as it crumbled to dust in his hand before their very eyes.
What?
The devil's appearance began to flitter between Beast and the old priest of Tristram, his voice changing in time with each shift.
No!
We needed fresh blood.
And you two seemed as gullible as any.
You pathetic fools. You tricked us.
The beast waved his arm at the corpses that littered the corners of the room.
You
and many before you.
Around them now, the minions brought forth 2 stone pillars. Attached to them, an upside-down corpse with deep cuts traversing their necks. The minions untied the ropes and let the bodies fall to the floor.
Now, we can continue with the blood ritual.
No!
Said Nomad, as the minions began dragging them towards the stone pillars.
No!